levels.
Right.
So that's the goal. I have to work on 18 through
Exactly.
22.
Right.
So that's
Exactly.
good because
So the thing to do is just to go through. If you can make a Xerox of it, it's best.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll probably transliterate and make little symbols for the sound, so that by writing, I'm a visual learner, so by writing it down and transliterating and putting the song symbols and all, it will start to make sense for me. Like, however,
absolutely.
becomes
so right. So all I'm saying is that as you go through these three verses, right, just pick out a separate color for katon, for etnachta, and for sof pasuk, right? And on your Xerox, right, mark those three different types of clauses with the different colors. And the ones that you don't know yet, you know what? Don't worry about those yet. Right? Those will come. Just worry about the ones that you recognize.
Right.
And
this is great. I need a goal like this, because this sort of, unfocused, I mean, it is focusing me to this book, but random phrases, like I say, if I hear it and I hear it and repeat, that's great. But giving me this to really dig my, sink my teeth into, and that will help my learning progress for sure.
Right. There's always this sort of balancing, right, between the, what's the performative goal, right, which is the haftarah that you're going to do, versus, the theoretical learning to make that performative goal possible, right? So you're going to be toggling back and forth.
By the way, in the Torah itself, they don't put all these little symbols, right? Is that what I've understood?
Right, so in the Torah scroll, right, there are no vowel or trope marks, but in the Haftarah, you'll be reading it from the book, so you'll have those in front of you.
It just like really came more clear to me now, to realize when people are reading their Torah portion, you're just looking at the letters with no aid, so you really have to know.
You have to. There's a level of I don't like to call it memorization, but it's definitely a level of familiarity that's higher than with the Haftarah.
I'm glad I went with Haftarah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
The good thing is, though, with the Torah, right, is that you've got two people, one on either side of you, right, who are there to help you in case you forget something. Whereas the Haftarah, right, you're just sitting there all by yourself. Which I remember the first time I ever read Haftarah, I was silly, and I said, I had already learned how to do Torah, and so I said, I'm going to read the Maftir portion, the little portion before the Haftarah. So by the time I got to the Haftarah, I had completely forgotten the Haftarah trope. It was just gone. All I had was the Torah trope.
Wow.
And I realized that, with the Torah, like, even if you forget, like, no big deal. Someone is there to sort of, because that, they're trained just to kind of to pick you up and send you on your way again. With the Haftarah, the whole congregation is just sitting there looking at you. And at least that was the way it was, for me. And they were all looking at me expectantly, and I was like, it's gone.
Oh my gosh.
It was completely mortifying. Luckily someone was there and said, just read it. Don't worry about the trope, just read it. You can definitely read it, so just read it without the trope. And that's what I did. So it could have been worse. It could have been worse.
Right.
Yeah. So that was, anyway, adventures in becoming a rabbi. So, all right, so welcome everyone.
Something happened in our lives like that.
Yeah, things. Yeah, everyone has had that kind of experience where
Where you screwed up.
where something
You moved.
mortifying has happened and you're
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
all right. So how is everybody today?
Just fine, thank you.
Good. So we're going to talk about Shabbat today, and so I sent around those documents.
Yeah.
So if people, but I don't have them. Unfortunately, I don't have them. Oh, maybe I do have them on. I can get them on this computer. Okay, great. So I can put them up on the screen. So, but I thought that we could talk about Shabbat, and then we could look, depending on how, some combination of what your interests are and how the conversation goes, we can focus more on the Heschel pieces, or we can focus more on the nuts and bolts of doing Shabbat. And I'm sort of inclined to focus today on the doing, and focus next week on the more Heschel-y parts. But I'm open. If people would really prefer to do Heschel, we can read that instead. But before we do either of those things, I just kind of want to check in, because today is March 12th, which, if I understand it correctly, right, we're about 3 months more or less to the day of our CU. So I just want to get a little bit of feedback from folks. How is it going? How are people feeling? Is there something you need that you're not getting? So on and so forth. And then I also just wanted to talk a little bit about the siyum, the ceremony we're going to have, and begin to sort of get, for those of you who haven't already sort of figured out what it is you're going to do for the as your sort of part of the siyum, to get you thinking about, well, what would be an appropriate thing for you to contribute to that experience. Go ahead, Mayim.
First of all, you mentioned the Heschel thing, and I don't know what you mean by doing the Heschel. And then as far as the siyum goes, are we supposed to think of something to do, or I don't have any idea of what kind of parts there are? Maybe you can tell us what kind of parts there are to play.
Well, that's part of the question. Some people, I think, already have an idea of what they're doing, and other people might have no idea, but have some ideas of what might be possible. Hello, Fred. And then other people
how are you?
have no idea even what the options are. So,
Okay.
Ellen, go ahead.
Yeah.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
I'd like to read the recitation of the Shema from the Saturday morning service on page 155.
All right. So I think that is certainly is a possibility. And as long as no one else is dying to do that, I'm happy to assign that to you. If someone else is dying to do that, then we'll have a conversation about how to divide it up. Go ahead, Ann.
I'm going to be learning the Torah Numbers chapter 17, 1 through 5.
Amazing. And I actually had heard that from Sherry and was very, very excited. And I heard the same little bird, Lori, told me that you're also going to take an Aliyah. Is that true?
I am. I'm going to be reading 17.
Come in, please.
Someone's coming up to bring it in your... Okay, go ahead, Lori. I'm sorry.
I'm going to be reading, I think it's 17, 9 through 15.
Phenomenal. All right. That's amazing.
Allegedly,
What?
allegedly.
You've got you've got you've got 3 months and you're gonna have a lot of support. So it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. I'm very
It's
excited.
amazing.
Yeah. Sherry is incredible. She's such an amazing teacher. So it's really great. Go ahead, Ellen. Ellen Kahn, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that maybe, can I read Lekad D instead of the Shema?
The problem with Lecha Dodi is that it's on Friday night. So you certainly could read it, and that would be great, but it would have to be for the Friday night. But the Shema is fine. The only reason I hesitate at all, right, is because it's such a central part of the service, and there might be someone else who'd also like to have it. So I just don't want to have it be like a first come first serve sort of thing. I would want to be intentional about it.
So we can't do anything from Friday
But
night.
I think it should be fine. I think we can find other things for people to read. There's plenty of liturgy. There's plenty of liturgy.
So it might be okay if I read the Shema on page 155?
It should work out fine. Go ahead, Helen.
Working with Rachel,
Yes.
we were told to think about something you wanted to talk about for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And well, that's what I'm doing.
Great.
You know,
Great.
and
So I'm
related.
hoping that the people who are in Rachel's group focusing on Divrei Torah will be willing to give a little Devar Torah.
Right.
With the caveat that even though we are on Parashat Korach, right, that if there's another portion of the Torah that you're just dying to give a little word about, right, that is just fine. And you could do it about a different portion of the Torah if for some reason Parashat Korach offers nothing of interest to you.
Okay.
Which is hard to imagine considering there's an earthquake, but that's all right, go ahead, Mayim.
What's the date planned for the Siyum?
June, it's the second
Well-
Shabbos of June.
June 11th?
Let me just check.
That's the second Friday.
June
No,
12th.
Saturday, June 12th.
June
So
12th.
I thought you said we were doing it Friday evening. We're doing it Saturday morning?
Saturday morning. Saturday morning.
Okay.
I mean, we can do. There will be a Friday evening service, and anyone who is interested in being part of that Friday evening service and making that part of the celebration, that is a tradition on in many congregations that a bar and bat mitzvah is celebrated both Friday night and Saturday. So certainly we can do that. So I think Ellen, for instance, Ellen Kahn can recite some of the verses of Lecha Dodi on Friday night and then do the Shema on Saturday morning, and that would be just fine. Mayim,
Friday night, where's it gonna be, the ceremony gonna be Friday night?
Ellen, these are that kind of logistical questions we can only gesture at. We can't be
So
clear
Friday
about
night,
that.
I can do Lekad Dodi,
You could do parts of Lecha Dodi, exactly. Yeah.
and Saturday night, I can do Saturday morning, I can do
Parts of the Shema, exactly. Yeah. And Mayim, Sherry had suggested maybe you'd like to do Ashrei.
I should have it down by then.
And actually one of the beautiful things about doing Ashrei, especially if we can be in person, right, is that it's responsive. So you would read the Aleph and the Gimel and so on and so forth. You'd read every other line, and the congregation would respond to you with the alternating lines. And so there's a tremendous amount of power in doing Ashrei because you control the entire crowd. So that is an option for you to do. There are obviously other options, and as regards people doing Hebrew parts of the service, there's really no reason why you can only do one. it's really based on your own desire. If you'd like to do other parts of the service in Hebrew, I'm very happy to have you do that. And if you are not comfortable in Hebrew, we can find parts of the service for you to read in English.
Oh, Rabbi Jim, I really like Misha Berach too. I just love that melody and everything.
Great. If you're willing to sing it. That's the only thing, is there's certain things that you need to sing.
Right.
And so, so if you're willing to sing, phenomenal. I mean, Ashrei also is supposed to be sung, but it's a pretty simple little tune.
Well, I'll have to have my voice
Berach.
by then, but hopefully I'll have a voice. But
Right.
on the well, I'll talk to Sherry about the Ashrei, because I think in Lev Shalem, I don't know if it's got all the alternating parts, does it?
Yeah.
It does, okay.
I mean,
Where,
I don't think it's marked that way. It's not marked that way, but it ends up being pretty obvious which ones are the ones that you would say. But I would recommend that even if you're, for your learning, you should learn both, because if someone else is leading it, right, then you need to chant back those other verses. So.
where are you going to have the service?
Well, Fred, that's a great question. My hope is that the service will be at 100 Center Street in Brookline.
100 where?
100 Center Street in Brookline.
Oh,
Up on
okay.
the 10th floor. And I'm also hoping
Not in the
that
community room where the ark is?
To move the ark.
the ark is, it's nice to have the ark. On the other hand, it's a smaller space, and the Skyline Cafe is such a beautiful space that it would be nice that if, as I'm hoping, we are able to have guests, which means, Fred, that we could try to arrange for transportation for you to join us in person, and that the worship and study members would also be able to be here. That everyone could be here together along with our other guests and family. And if we are able to do that, then we would have to have it, I think, in Skyline to make room for everybody. And then, but we will also be Zooming it, or at least live streaming it for people who are not able to be there.
Well,
Go
they're
ahead, Ann.
hoping by May that most adults should have access to the vaccine. So
Right. I mean, the president's goal is for everybody to be vaccinated by May. So hopefully by June, everyone will feel comfortable being in company. If we will still be masked regardless, I think. But just but I don't want to make any promises about that, because obviously everything could change and we could go back into lockdown, and then we would do it all on Zoom. Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Is the ark movable?
This ark is not really movable. It's
no.
extremely heavy. So we will see. If it's possible that if we can only have the people from CCB in the room, then we would do it in the community room and have the ark. It really will depend on all kinds of factors that are really hard at this point to make any determinative decisions. 3 months is still a lot of time for things to change, and I'm hoping that those changes will be positive. But obviously, until the time gets a little closer, we're just not going to know.
What about rounding out the rest of the services? There are two or three of us that are going to have aliyot for the Torah.
Right.
What about the rest of the Torah portion?
Well, what I'm hoping, is that we will be able to make this a kind of a regular worship and study service. That I'm hoping that this will. I'm sort of have a informal goal, not known by anybody at CCB. So please don't spill the beans. But my informal hope and prayer is that we can begin to have guests for services beginning in June. And so this could actually be the first kind of in-person service that we do, meaning that as a kind of a what we do is a lane-a-thon. So people who are not familiar with lane-a-thons, right? This is where our education person, Sherry, sets up, everybody who is willing, takes one little portion of the Torah. So we would fill in. If that's not possible, Lori, then we will do it some other way. If that means that Rachel and I are doing all the laning, that's fine.
Got it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ellen.
If it's in person, will it still be on Zoom also?
Yes, we will. Everything. My plan is to try to figure out how to make sure that every program we do is at the very least live streamed, even if it's not Zoomed. I would love for it to be Zoomed, but we're going to be trying that over the next couple of weeks. We're going to see how Zooming and mixing Zoom with in-person programs goes. If it goes well, phenomenal. If not, then what we'll probably do is switch to a live stream model where there's the in-person, and the people who can't be there will be able to watch it, but not fully participate. We're going to need to figure out how that goes. Yeah, go ahead, Mime.
Just while we're dreaming about what we would like and envisioning, if we have it at Skyline Cafe, and I know I have a list of a lot of people I want to invite. I hope we can have a little Oneg Shabbat or something after, and
I really hope so too. I think that's part of the that would be sort of part of the fun, would be to have an actual kiddush for our service, and have a chance for people to really spend time together. I'm hoping my dream is that this is sort of a reopening. On the other hand, right, it's a dream, and I don't want to get too attached to it because there's no assurances at all that it will be possible.
Right.
So
Well,
we'll
if
see.
you want worship and study people there, you have to provide them with food.
Well, yeah, the thing is, if it's
We are the minion that moves on our stomach.
Exactly. At this point, we are not doing any programming with food, but it is still April. So it's still March. So let's get through March and April, and we'll see where we are in May, and we'll take it from there. All right. Any other questions? Any other things that people need, that they're worried about, that they're concerned?
So I still have my question about what's Heschel? What you mean by Heschel?
Okay. So I sent around yesterday. I sent around 2 articles,
Yes.
2 PDFs. The first one was this a little mini prayer book type of a thing.
Oh yeah, okay.
Okay, and then the second one was some articles by Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Okay, got you. Right. I didn't get to that yet. I just been focusing
I didn't either.
on Shabbat
Yeah.
prayer.
So why don't we say that next week we will look at the Heschel articles in more detail. Feel free if you want, if you have the wherewithal and the time. Those are just 2 excerpts from his book, which is called The Sabbath, which is a wonderful book. Let me see. I brought a bunch of books downstairs. I'm not sure I brought that one. I need to completely rearrange my office, but I think I ended up leaving those books upstairs. Anyway, but the Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel is a great book for a number of reasons. I find it to be very dated, but not in an unpleasant way. It's definitely of its time, but it's still very relevant for today, just in kind of different some of the words that he might use, like technological society, right, had sort of a different meaning in the 50s and 60s than it does now, right? although they're not so different that it renders the book irrelevant. So we can have a look at those next week. So today, if you have, do people have the capacity to put this in front of themselves, or do you need me to put it on the screen?
Have it on the screen.
I can open it.
Okay, I'll put it on the screen and that, but it'll just take me a second to get it there.
Did you realize, Rabbi Jim, that you sent the Heschel out? It's sideways. I guess I have to.
Oi, I apologize.
Oh, let me see. Now I see a way to turn it around. Okay, good.
It's
All right.
still,
All right, thank you. It's fine.
Mhm.
All right. Okay, sorry everybody. There we go. All right, so here this is. All right, we won't try to look at everything at once. We'll just sort of open it. Oopsie, sorry guys. Oh, come on. There we go.
Is there a way we can copy it?
I sent it to you yesterday as an email,
Mhm.
Oh,
so it should be available to
Yes.
you. And if you have a printer at home, you can, then you can print it out. All right, so this is from a book from the Reform movement that of the various books relating to Shabbat, this is the one that I think is sort of the easiest to follow in many ways. And so this is the one I gave you, but there are obviously many, many options. The word in Yiddish is bencher. The Yiddish word to bench is, benchen is to pray, right? So it's a little,
it's to bless.
like a blessing. Thank you, blessing. So it's like a book. It's the book of blessings, right? So it's not a full siddur, right? But it's a book of blessings for various occasions, usually for Shabbat and holidays. That when we're making a kiddush or lighting candles, right? It also includes the grace after meals, which I didn't include in this little section, but that's one of the things that many traditional Jewish families do on Friday night is they sing songs, right? And there's a series of songs that are traditional for Shabbat evening. It's one of the things that I always kind of wish I had been able to get into with my family, but no one in my family except for me likes to sing, and they didn't really like singing. They didn't like listening to me sing, so we never really got into it. So I haven't included any of that material here, in part because I didn't want to overload you, and also in part because it's not as though this is not a huge part of my own practice, so I have less to sort of offer in that regard. Certainly we do read the grace after meals when we have Shabbat, and we do singing when we have Shabbat dinners at 100 Center Street and at 1550 Beacon. So hopefully in due course, we will be able to have those dinners again and be able to do all this stuff again. So you see how important Shabbat is. The first quotation is from the Talmud, right? So 6th, 7th century of the Common Era, right? And the Shabbat is a queen, right? Whose coming changes the humblest home into a palace, right? So we get the sense here where, Heschel is not making up stuff on his own, right? Heschel, when he talks about, a sanctuary in time, right? He's taking this idea from the Talmud, right? That when Shabbat comes in, right, whatever place you're in, right, wherever you are, that becomes the palace, right? And it's based on time rather than on space. And then Joseph Caro, So he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is those words mean the set table. Shulchan is a table, and Aruch is set or arranged. And this is a Jewish code of law, based on as most law codes are, based on a previous model. But he writes from a Sephardic perspective. Yeah. And then he wrote, actually, he was a Kabbalist also. And then his work was then annotated by somebody in Poland to reflect an Ashkenazic perspective. But he is sort of the basic code of law. So the Holy Shabbos is the greatest gift given us by the Holy One, right? Which is a big statement, right? Of all the things that God gave us, right? This is the greatest one. And so we should rejoice, right? It's our job, right? Our responsibility to rejoice when Shabbat comes. And so if the expectation of a special guest would cause us to prepare with great care, how much more so should we act when the guest is the Shabbat bride? Right? Very interesting, right? That we see in the transition from the Talmud to the Shulchan Aruch, right? Some 8, 9, 10 centuries, right? That we move from the Sabbath is a queen, right? Beagle, somewhat untouchable, right? Perhaps, certainly feminine, right? But somewhat distant, right? Whereas by Caro's time in the 16th century, influenced by Kabbalah, right? The special guest of Shabbat is now a bride, right? Specifically, in Shabbat, and especially the Shabbat evening becomes a kind of a wedding ceremony, right? A celebration of mystical union. Right? So fresh covering should be set aside for Friday evening, right? So even at Hebrew Rehab in Roslindale, right, on Friday night, they cover the tables with tablecloths. Right? It's the only day during the week, the only meal during the week that there's tablecloths on the table. Because these days, the tablecloths that you need to use in a nursing home, right, are very, very expensive. And so they can't use them every day. But they're willing to use those resources, right, for Shabbat.
That's so
Everyone,
nice.
even someone with servants, must do something himself to honor Shabbat. I'm sorry, something special should even be eaten on Shabbat, right? So there are rabbis who have decided that it's unethical to eat animals, yet on Friday nights they have chicken, right? Because we need to do something special to honor Shabbat. Everyone, even someone with servants, must do something himself to honor Shabbat, whether it be helping prepare the meal, cleaning the house, or purchasing flowers to adorn the Shabbat table. Right. So if you're in a frum neighborhood, meaning a neighborhood where there's a lot of pious Jews, on Friday, right, on Thursday evening and Friday during the morning, you'll see lots of Jewish men, right, who have sort of otherwise traditional gender roles, where the woman will be taking care of the housekeeping and the man is doing Torah study or whatever, right? You'll see the men running around getting the diapers, getting the flowers, doing the marketing, right? Because of this, right? That everybody.
You see a lot of Chabadniks at Wegmans on Friday afternoon.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly. So you see that this code of Jewish law is still very alive today, right? And not only in sort of pious Orthodox settings, right? This code of Jewish law is what we read in this Reform Movement little booklet, right? So it's important across all of the various all the various movements. All right. So we'll move on to the next page. All right, so the first thing, right, is the lighting of candles, right? So because it's the Reform movement, right, there's always liturgy in English. Beforehand, you can use it or not. But the blessing, right, for actually lighting the candles is here. Would someone like to try reading it in Hebrew?
I'll do it.
Great.
Oh, do I need to do the hand on the picture? Sorry.
No.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'havlei shel Shabbat.
Great.
Amen.
Lovely. Okay, wonderful. So, and you sang the traditional tune as well, Ken, which is amazing. So
You can see I've done a lot of Shabbat dinners. That's one thing I know.
Exactly. Great. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So very important here, right? As we will see, we'll see the contrast in later blessings, right? That this is a commandment blessing, right? So a regular blessing will be the Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, right? Just the first two lines there, right? We call that Shem Umalchut, right? The name of God and God's sovereignty, right? But then we have the next two lines, which are only, or actually the next line and then the word in the first word in the fourth line, right? We only use that little formula, right? When we have a mitzvah, right? When we're commanded to do something, right? So Kent and I were talking earlier about challah, right? Is it a mitzvah? Is it a commandment to eat challah, eat bread on Friday nights? No, it's not a commandment, right? Because we don't say asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'echol challah, right? The way that on Passover, right, it actually is a commandment to eat the matzah, right? So on Passover, we will read these four words, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu achilat matzah, right? That commanded us about the eating of matzah, right? But here on Shabbos, right, we actually have this as a commandment. Now, this is a very interesting commandment, right? Because by and large, the rabbis are a little bit reticent to make things into a commandment unless they can find evidence of this commandment in the Torah, right? But you can't find anywhere in the Torah where it says there should be candles lit on Shabbat, right? On the contrary, right, it says you should kindle no lights in your settlements during Shabbat, right? So it is kind of interesting, right, that the rabbis decide, well, you should kindle lights. When should you kindle them?
Right before, right?
Right before Shabbat. Exactly. And in the way that, religion often goes, right, that if there is a disagreement, right, then one side of the disagreement will say, one, in this case, right, I forget the Karaites, I think it is. The Karaites decided there should be no light on Shabbos, right? And the rabbis were like, what? You should spend Shabbos in the dark? That makes no sense, right? Shabbos is supposed to be celebration. It's supposed to be a delight, right? How is it a delight if you're sitting in the cold and in the dark, right? It's not fun at all, right? So kindle the lights before Shabbat, right? So that you can have joy during Shabbat.
And cover your eyes with your hands while you're saying the blessing.
Exactly, right. So right now, Ann, can you tell us why we might do that?
Well, we're supposed to say the blessing. Oh, let's see, Shabbat doesn't begin until we've lighted the candles and said the blessing.
Right.
And we don't want to say the blessing without the candles lighted. And we
Right.
light them, then it starts Shabbat. And we still got to say the blessing. So we cover up our eyes so we can't see the candles. Therefore, they're technically lit. And we say the blessing and then we open. There we are.
then they're lit. Exactly, right? So we cover our eyes, right? And then so, and I also think like it's another sort of, you're exactly right, Ann. And I always like to add to that explanation, right? That there's a sort of beauty in the Shabbat candles that is enhanced if we light them and then we cover our eyes and we say the blessing and then we open it and we sort of see there, right? This is the beauty of the Shabbat candles, the joy of the Shabbat candles. Now, traditionally, the candles are lit by women. And so there's special prayers that are often said related to the lighting of the candles by the matriarch of the house. Right. So I think here that, this is, excuse me, these are sort of variations on it. This book, I think, was from the 90s. So it's probably not quite as woke as it, might be today, but it's, they're still, I don't think they're making a point here that it's women saying these. One thing to say is that I didn't Xerox for you all the intermediate pages, and there's a bunch of sort of questions and answers about various aspects of the thing. So if people are interested, I can Xerox more of this book and send it around. Might actually be interesting for you, but you can use this version just as like, what you use on a Friday night to keep in mind all the prayers. And then I'll try to remember to Xerox these other things for you. All right. The next thing we do, right, is we sing Shalom Aleichem, right? So there's a beautiful, this is a very nice song, right, about the angels coming to your house, right? And the words are basically mostly the same over the course of the 4 verses. So they're great. It's great for singing if you don't know a lot of Hebrew, right? Because you don't need to know a lot of different words. you get these words in your head. And the tune is Shalom Aleichem. Aleichem
Everybody's good except for Rabbi.
Okay. And then there's the second part of the song. And what I'll do, I think I'll mute everybody so that so everyone can feel free to sing along and not feel like they're getting in the way of others. So I'll just mute everyone. You can unmute yourself as soon as we're done. Great. And then the second verse is Bohem Shalom Malechei Shalom Malechei Elyon Mihi Melech Malchei Malachim Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Sorry, I took a bad breath there. Now there's a machloket, as people might not know what a machloket is. A machloket is the word for disagreement, right? One of the most important words in the Jewish lexicon, right? There always has to be a machloket, right? So the other way to think about that is the 2 Jews, 3 opinions sort of idea, right? So when this song, supposedly when this song was written, the idea was that the first verse is a little bit melancholy, right? The second verse is much more jolly, right? You came, right? Here you are, right? And then the third verse is also supposed to be jolly, right? Barchuni, right? You are going to, so Shalom Aleichem is welcome, you ministering angels. Right, Boachem means you're coming in peace, right? So we're very excited about the fact that they're coming in peace, right? We're very excited about the fact that they're going to bless us, right? Barchuni l'shalom, bless us, right, with peace, right? And then the last verse is Tzeitchem l'shalom, right? Take your leave, take your leave in peace, right? So already at the beginning of Shabbat, right, we haven't even gotten to Kiddush yet, and we're already anticipating that Shabbat will end, and we'll be a little bit sad to see the ministering angels go, right? So that there, so the second verse is the same as the third verse, and then the fourth verse reverts to the sort of slower, sadder version of in the first verse. Of course, many people don't like that. They don't want an ABBA structure. They want an ABAB structure. So the rule I always recommend is if you're at home, at your own house, do ABBA. If you're at someone else's house and they do ABAB, don't fight them. Just do it the way they do it. When in Rome, do as the Romans. But this is, and then there are other melodies for Shalom Aleichem, but so you don't have to feel like you're stuck with that one. But that one is relatively easy to sing, and it feels like everybody knows it, even if you don't know it well, because you've probably heard it. All right. Any questions? Unmute yourself if you have questions. Okay. All right, the next piece of it has to do with children. So if you have your children with you, right, you can do it this way. But what I started doing at 100 Center Street was basically that everyone would bless everyone else. And since most people in in the generation that we work with are, most people are either male or female, right? I haven't added the multiple genders yet, but I'm sure that'll come, and I'm ready to do it as soon as someone tells me how. So for boys, right, or for men, I like to say for males, right, Yisimcha, Elohim ki Ephraim u'Menashe, right, and then for the women, Yisimech Elohim Kasara Rivka Rachel v'Leah, right? So very interesting, right? Why is there a difference here, right? Why isn't it Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Now the reason, right, is that Jacob actually blessed his two grandkids, right, Ephraim and Menashe, in the Torah, right? And then when egalitarianism arrived, right, we needed to figure out, well, is there an equivalent blessing of a daughter or a granddaughter? And so I think the answer was no, we couldn't find that in the Torah. So we will revert to the matriarchs, which is always a good choice. So, and then we sing the priestly blessing, which is in the book of Numbers. And there's a million different versions of this. And what I'll do is, I'll try to make a recording of all of this. Maybe I'll put it on a YouTube for people so that you can use it at home as you can sort of sing along with me, but not without all this commentary.
Do you mean this Yevarecha part?
Yeah.
Okay.
Say that again, Ma'am?
That's the priestly blessing.
Yes. Yevarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha is the priestly blessing found in chapter, I forget, 6 or 7 of the book of Numbers. And it is described as the oldest prayer in the Torah, right? And it is described, God says to Aaron, this is how you shall bless the people of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's, so we use it a lot, right? We use it for kids. Very often, my chaplaincy colleagues and I will say it for people who are no longer able to speak, on their sickbed. So it really runs the gamut of the entire life cycle. We say this all the time. And it's really just it's just a beautiful prayer. This translation of it right, is typical of many 20th century, early 21st century translations, right? They avoid translating literally the word panav, right? What does panav mean?
Your face.
The face, exactly, right? So, Maimonides, who would probably have translated it literally and then yelled at you, don't think that God has a face, right? Just because the Torah says face, right? The Torah means this metaphorically, right? In our age, it's hard sometimes for people to deal with metaphor, right? People tend to be a little bit more literal these days than in the past. And so we're going to avoid that word face, and we'll use things like light, right? And presence, right? As opposed to face. Both are completely fine, right? I don't have a strong preference for either. I'm as, unfortunately, I think I'm as literal minded as everyone else. So sometimes it's nice not to have to deal with that extra layer of metaphor.
Jim, this is used in Christian services as well, is it not?
I'm
In some
positive that
form?
it is. I'm positive that it is, right? There are many parts of the, first of all, of the Tanakh, right? What Christians would call the Old Testament, but also of, also things that are in either the synagogue service or in a bencher, right? That have migrated from a Jewish context into a Christian context. And so in as much as the church sort of considered itself, right, the new Israel, when God says to Aaron, this is how you should bless the people of Israel, right? The church is going to take that like, yes, that's us, right? So, and more power to them. This is a beautiful blessing. It should not be limited to Jews. And actually, it is one of the things that I will often use this blessing in both Hebrew but being sure to translate it when I'm working with a non-Jewish person in the nursing home. All right. Any other questions? All right. So now we get to Kiddush, right? So we pour a glass of wine, right? Now, these verses, right? Vahi erev vahi voker yom hashishi. So technically, those I forget if it's the first 4 or the first 6 words are not technically supposed to be included, according to some traditions. Other traditions, as you can see, this being one of them, do include them, right? I think Yom HaShishi is generally included, right? But it really starts on Vayachulu, right? And God was finished, right? Or were finished heaven and earth, right? So it's about the end of creation. What is Shabbat, right? Shabbat is the crown of God's creation of the world. So this is actually, right? Vayachulu is how in the Torah, in the what probably should be the end of the first chapter of Genesis, but it's actually, according to the Christian division of the chapters, which is what we use in Judaism too, right? It's the beginning of chapter 2. So it's interesting, right? The beginning of chapter 2, right, is the end, right? And they were finished, right? It was finished. So we have this chanting every week, right, reminding us, right, that Shabbat is the end of creation, right? It's where God finished God's work, or at the very least ceased from God's work, right, and rested, right? So, and you can see from the transliteration, right? Vayishbot, right? That is a form of the word Shabbat, right? And also down here, kivo Shabbat, right? Because he rested, right? Or ceased.
I never even thought of Yishbot.
Yeah.
As,
So and this is where we get the idea of what do we not do on Shabbat? We don't do milacha, right? We don't do creative work on Shabbat. We don't change the world, right? We don't do the work of creation on Shabbat, right? So it's very complicated what constitutes work that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat, right? For a lot of reasons, right? Not least of all that the Torah never says, what is it? Right. So when we read Heschel, we'll learn a little bit about, well, what are the things we're not supposed to do? But we can sort of get the idea, right, that we don't do anything having to do with creation.
Jim, but if you don't do creative work, can you still do reparative work? Can you still do tikkun olam on Shabbat?
Well, this is where you get into really complicated questions, Lori, right? Because what constitutes creative work, right?
Yeah.
Is teaching Torah, that's not creative, right? Visiting the sick, that's not creative. I mean, there's all kinds of problems with this, right? And so the rabbis end up needing to make, they try to make it not arbitrary, but it ends up feeling very arbitrary. What are the things, like you can cut food on Shabbat, but you're not supposed to cook it, right? But isn't it more work to cut it than it is to cook it, right? So it's,
it always seems to me if the essence of Shabbat is to distinguish itself from the rest of the week and not to, quote, do work, do tasks,
right,
that may be unpleasant, for example.
Go ahead, finish your thought.
Doing things like visiting the sick or volunteering in a nursing home or volunteering in a soup kitchen on Shabbat almost, to me, would seem to enhance the holiness of the day. But of course, I'm not an Orthodox Jew.
But again, I think that the one thing I would quibble with you, and not from an Orthodox perspective, but just from the understanding of work in the tradition, right? It doesn't have to do necessarily with pleasant or unpleasant.
Right. I realized as I was saying it that
right. It has to do really more right. It has to do more with to what degree are you changing the physical environment. So I would agree with you. Going to a soup kitchen and feeding people who are hungry is not changing the physical environment, right? It's enhancing the joy and the survival of other humans, right? I'm not Orthodox either, so an Orthodox rabbi might have a very different opinion about that. I just don't know.
That's why I didn't ask an Orthodox rabbi.
Exactly.
But I've always, after years of not growing up with anything other than lighting candles, but not really having a Shabbat observance, it was the great thing to make up for myself what constituted work and what constituted things that brought rest and enhancement.
Exactly. And I think that that's really, I think that that's really what is at the essence of the rabbi's search, right? For what constitutes work versus what constitutes rest, right? And I think what happens, right, over the course of centuries, right, is that these notions get very sclerotic, right? They get very stiff and rigid in a way they probably shouldn't be. And there's actually a really interesting, set of scholarly articles in the late 90s talking about how the loss of lived experience of Orthodoxy, as opposed to reading codes, right, and basing your practice on books, right, had the effect of leading to a level of strictness, right, that it was not actually consistent with the tradition, right, because the tradition was much more lived and much more flexible. And that the sort of rigidity of code Judaism, right, is fine for people who want that, but it makes it very difficult for everybody else. Go ahead, Ann.
We had Rabbi Ariel in Portland had the question come up. We had knitters, one in
Yeah.
particular, and she wanted to know if it was okay to knit on Shabbat. Well, Rabbi decided that, in the old days, knitting and weaving were means of earning your livelihood. They were work. But now it was a more of a hobby and a relaxation. And so it was probably okay if they felt like doing it to do it on Shabbat. So we had this woman always doing knitting during Torah study. And my grandmother used to say, though, if you sewed on Shabbat, you'd have to take all the stitches out with your nose when you got to heaven.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, but everyone turns into Penelope, right? On everything you knit on Shabbat has to be undone by the end of Shabbat. Exactly.
But there is a distinction between work and pleasure.
Right, and I think and so I think that is one of the ways in which the tradition is flexible, right, and responds to the reality of people's lives. Now, in an Orthodox setting, the rabbi probably wouldn't have been comfortable, right?
No, definitely not.
Right, with a woman sitting in the women's section and knitting, right? Whereas in a liberal setting, people probably could manage. In some liberal settings, people could manage that. In other liberal settings, it would have. And this is another very, and this actually, Ann, you raise a very important point about Shabbat, right? Which is about communal observance and respect for communal norms, right? This happens all the time at worship and study when we have a bar bat mitzvah with a less than observant family, right? They always want to have the photographer, right? And right? And one of the communal norms, not of worship and study, strictly speaking, right, but of Harvard Hillel, which is which houses minyanim from various backgrounds, right? One of those sort of communal norms is that we don't have cameras on Shabbat, right? And so it's almost always some sort of a conflict with the photographers who are used to sort of pushing boundaries so that they can get the pictures for their clients, versus usually, one of our members in particular, we always want to make sure she's there on a Shabbat when there's a bar mitzvah so she can chase away the photographer. She's the only one with the gumption to do it. But it's an ongoing question, right? So it's not just a matter of, does the rabbi herself think that it's okay to knit on Shabbat? She may not, right? It's also about, well, what will be sort of insulting to the community, right? What will the community be comfortable with, right? So another good example of that, right? Traditionally, we don't play music on Shabbat with instruments, right? For reasons that I find to be somewhat silly, right? The reason primarily is that we're afraid we might fix the instrument if it breaks, right? We're putting ourselves in danger of doing creative work, right? But on the other hand, right, at worship and study, right, it's a long-standing tradition that we don't have any instruments on Shabbat at worship and study. And it's less halachic at this point than it is just the custom of the congregation. And I've had multiple people who've come to the congregation interested in joining us, and very often not people who are super observant, but people will ask me, now this isn't one of those congregations that has like guitars and stuff, right?
Oh, yes, we did.
It's very interesting. So that's one of the reasons why, like on a Friday night, I play the guitar, and on Saturday morning, not so much. Right. So, Ann, go ahead.
I'm leaving.
Oh, you gotta go. All right. So we didn't get through all of this. So I apologize, but we will pick this up with the actual Kiddush prayer next week. And then we will we'll look at a few other prayers, and then we will go to the Heschel. So if people would like to stick around and ask more questions, I'm more than happy to discuss them. I'm also happy to look at Hebrew prayer book Hebrew the easy way. If people would like to practice, I'm happy to. I just don't have the book in front of me, but I'm happy to hear you take turns practicing, and you can ask me whatever questions you have. So I'm going to stop this particular share.
So the one thing that I wanted to mention is, and this falls under never ask a question you don't really want the answer to.
Right.
But I happened to ask a Chabad rabbi, because I was taking a class at Chabad of Newton about their Shabbat tea service in the back, because they always had hot water in the back and tea and coffee. And I was given an entire book of the maximum temperature that water can be on Shabbat so that you're not cooking. And instead you're drinking this like lukewarm drink. I mean, it's terrible.
I think it's a fascinating topic, right? And I think that one of the, there's, in the more, I don't want to call it modern Orthodox, but in the, there's a guy I really respect who's I don't think he considers himself Orthodox. He considers himself, modern egalitarian, but he has a whole show, podcast about these types of questions. People write in with questions like this, and he responds with the sort of traditional halakhic response on his terms, right?
Right.
And so one of those was actually about making coffee. Like, can you use a French press coffee machine? Can you use a pour over coffee machine? Can you use one of those machines that's you program, right, on Friday afternoon, and you program it to go off at 9 o'clock, and it grinds the beans and makes the coffee for you? Like, what's the permissible thing? And it was so interesting because he said, look, making coffee is really, it's just about pouring hot water over grounds. You're not cooking it, right?
Well, that's just it. According to this tome I was given, and which I then gave back because I couldn't get through it, the maximum temperature at which you can have water on Shabbat is 113 degrees, which is far from 212.
Right. Exactly.
And
The
whole reason for not showering or bathing or using hot water on Shabbat is because it would make your hot water heater mix hot and cold water.
Right. So it's right. So my guess, right, is that he comes from a tradition, right? He's decided that tradition, right, is not reasonable. Right. But he also says, no, you really shouldn't use a programmable machine. Like, that's not really Shabbos there. Right. Get a pot, right, and hold the water at the right temperature for Shabbos, and then pour it over your coffee grounds. Right. So it's very interesting how. So the one thing to remember about and Chabad is not the only culprit in this. Right. Plenty of liberal Jews are like this too. They say the answer is X.
Right.
Right. The rule is Y. This is what you can and cannot do. Right. One of the things that I actually never knew this, and I'm not so interested. I'm going to go and do the research. But this guy, his name, by the way, is Ethan Tucker. He's Gordon Tucker's son. So Gordon Tucker was one of the guys that did one of these. Recently, he spoke on in one of those Scholar Stream things that are available to us, and. Anyway, so he said that when electricity first became a thing, right, there was a school of thought in Judaism, right, that it was permissible to use electricity on Shabbat because it's not lighting a flame, right? It's connecting a circuit, it's not lighting a flame, right? And so there's no problem using electricity on Shabbat. And this was a legitimate stream of opinion in the Jewish world, right? In the Orthodox Jewish world, right? But it was not the side of the argument that quote unquote won the argument, right? And so to hear certain rabbis tell it, right? There's never been a question that you can use electricity on Shabbat. Of course you can't use electricity on Shabbat. That's not even a question, right? Whereas, well, actually, it is a question, right?
Then
And
there's
Ethan
some-
Tucker, go ahead.
Then there's something, you talked about making a circuit. The
Yeah.
Shabbat telephone in Israel, there is a phone designed to be used on Shabbat.
Oh, really?
If normally you make a circuit when the phone rings, then this one is designed so that you break a circuit.
Oh, interesting. I mean, and that
It was used in hospitals and so forth.
right, and that actually gets right to where Ethan Tucker goes on this question, right, which has to do with maybe we should take the question right from are we using electricity or are we not using electricity, right, to the larger question of well, why are we using it, right? What are we using it for, right? And for instance, like if we decide that using electricity is okay, right, then we could make the argument that as long as we have a Tesla car, right, we can drive on Shabbos, right? Because we're no longer, kindling the fire of an internal combustion engine, right? But that would ignore the fact, right, that one of the reasons we don't drive on Shabbat, right, according to tradition, right, it has nothing to do, right, with the means of locomotion, right? It has to do with the tradition that Shabbat is a day when you stay home, right? Shabbat is a day when you stay within your own techom, right? You stay within your own, what's the word I'm looking for in English? In your own domain, right? You don't move from domain to domain on Shabbos, right? You stay within your domain, right? And so, so people used to get very upset about the conservative movement deciding that you could drive to shul, right? But in essence, right, driving to shul at this point, the definition of a domain has shifted, right? That driving to shul is within your own domain. Now, Lori, you driving to worship and study maybe is not so much, in your domain because you're crossing the river and you have to find a place to park in Harvard Square on Shabbos.
It disturbs my whole sense of Shabbat.
Well, it does. I mean, that is a reality, right? I mean, I remember this from when I first converted, right? We were going to Temple Israel in Boston, and I was living in Whiskey Point in Brookline, right? Which is probably about a mile and a half from Temple Israel. And the Friday night service would start at 5:45. I don't know. I'm assuming it hasn't changed, but whatever. But you can just imagine 5:45, right? Going to, the Longwood medical area at 5:45 on a Friday, right? By the time I had driven that mile and a half, I was so frazzled. Right? It was like, how can I possibly go into a synagogue now? I'm like completely off the wall from stop and start traffic and people beeping and this, that, So, I got it was very clear, right? That was not very Shabbos-dich, right? Now, did I get into walking? No, I was a Reformed Jew. I wasn't going to walk. But
and a lot of it becomes the customs, and talking about some of the most wonderful Shabboses I've had were at the home of the late Putnams. who, as
Yes,
they became more observant, made sure their cooking was done by official sundown, had their hot water heated, and had all these things. But
right,
after dinner, after the grace after meals, Hillary turned on the Red Sox,
right,
and we
right.
sat
That
and
was
watched
Shabbos
baseball.
Right, that was shot a stick. I mean,
That's
and
right.
again, like, right, and I think, right, that we get stuck, right, in both directions, right? We get stuck in the direction of these are the rules, and if I'm not following the rules, then I'm not doing it right. And then we also get stuck, right, in these are the rules, and no one is going to make me do what I don't want to do. And both of those responses, right, make it difficult to get into a feeling of Shabbat, right? Shabbat is not about coercion, right? And Shabbat is not about sitting in the dark and doing nothing, right? So I do think, as you have already said, Lori, right, Shabbat is very much about making a distinction from your workaday world.
Which is why, as time went on, what I did, it was just totally non-halachic. Shabbat began whenever I could get home, have gotten groceries on my way home on a Friday night, done the cooking, taken however many deep breaths it took, and lit the candles. And
Right.
if Shabbat began at 6 or it began at 10 p.m., then it was Shabbat.
Right. And I think that's always going to be the
And we're comfortable with it, and that's what was important for me.
right. And that's always going to be the balancing.
I wouldn't presume to invite for supper someone who would not be comfortable with that.
Right. Right. It's all in who your community is, all in who your family is. So, so just to switch gears, if people want to ask questions, if people have questions about the Hebrew prayer book Hebrew the easy way, if there's words that don't make sense, if there are grammatical concepts that you're struggling with, please let me know. Next week I should have the book with me. Somehow I left it at home.
I will drop out of this discussion because Sherry is grilling me within an inch of my life on vowels.
Good.
Yes, well, I find it quite
Shabbat
a workout
shalom.
with her.
Good Shabbos, Lori.
Good Shabbos, Lori.
Good Shabbos, Maya.
Yeah, session with Sherry, boy, I'm exhausted at the end.
Oh, I tell you,
My
she,
brain is
for such a
fizzling.
small person, she is a real taskmaster. I tell you.
It's really good.
Yeah.
So I did have some questions, but I think
Great.
I'm gradually working them out.
Oh, good.
It just takes practice. So I'm trying
Yes.
to read a bit every day.
Right.
And it's getting better. Yeah, I don't know what to say other than that.
That's fine.
You have to practice a lot.
Great. Helen, how is it going? Are you also doing this prayer book Hebrew? Yeah. You're muted, Helen. I'm sorry. You're still muted. I can't hear you.
I have another.
Okay, is it now?
There you go. You're good.
Okay, I have all the things. I have flashcards, I have prayer book Hebrew, the other one. And I took a break from it, unfortunately. And now, I don't know, I'm finding it difficult for me to retain. I can follow, like there are words I know because they like Baruch and, the words in prayers that are always repeated that I know, but frankly, I don't know. I'm finding it not so easy. I keep looking back. What is this letter? So that's where I'm at, and it's mostly not enough practice.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say, what Mayim says is, I think, is very, very true. Which is that it really requires every day.
Yeah.
And even if it's tempting to take a break, that it can really backfire, unfortunately, to take a break.
Yes.
Because the way our brains work, especially as we get older, right? We really need to have the regular exposure.
Right.
And so the other thing that the other thing is to is just to listen and read along, right?
Mhm.
While someone is
Mhm.
reading.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to think of the best way for that to happen. There must be people who are reading on the internet who are reading the prayer book
Yes.
and follow
Yes.
along. But I'm not sure that that's like the most, depends on, like, it might be really fast, but
Yeah.
so you look into that.
I could. That's a good idea,
And if
actually.
you look into that, then that will sort of
Help me. Yeah.
allow you to hear it without having to produce it yourself. And then
Okay. That
Right.
I will do. I think it's a great
yeah,
idea.
and if and what you might do is use, if I actually do get around to doing the business that I said I was going to do with this Erev Shabbat thing, right? That you could use this and have me,
Yeah.
have my voice, and I'll try to do it.
The voice is good. I read it over a few times, going over the letters, just because
Yeah.
I know the prayers, but I don't. So for me, it was a good. Yeah, it was good practice. And I was feeling like giving up that aspect of this, but a part of me doesn't want to give up yet. So,
Yeah, I would really encourage you, because I really do think that once you get, because to Kent was saying earlier,
Yeah.
right, that and Kent, tell me if I've got it wrong, but Kent, as I understood you suggested that you had kind of gotten over the hump a little bit with the letters, and that it was beginning to feel a little bit more doable. And I do think that there is that hump,
okay.
right? And getting up the hump you can feel like Sisyphus. You get up
Yeah.
towards the top, and you get to the top, and you're like, holy moly, what's this? Oh,
Yeah.
I should know Aleph already,
Right. 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 Yeah.
So that really makes sense to me. And at the same time, I do think that over giving yourself the leeway, right, to give yourself that 5 to 10 minutes a day,
Yeah.
with the Hebrew letters, that over time, it's not going to be like learning a language like you did when you were 10, right? It's
Yeah,
just not.
I
It's
know.
we're not 10 anymore. It's
No.
going to take longer. Yeah.
Very far away, but thank you.
Exactly. 10 years old is a long time ago, even for me. So it's
Yeah.
So it's
Thank you. I'm really enjoying Rachel's class too.
Oh, good.
And so I'm feeling like when I get discouraged about this, I say, well, I'm okay with the other one.
Right,
So,
and that's great, and that's really good. And I would love you, Helen, to get to feel like you get to the point where you can also do a little bit of Hebrew for the service, in addition to your
Okay.
little Devar.
Well,
That
thank
would be
you
good.
for that,
Yeah.
for that push. That's good.
Yeah. Let's push you along. Exactly. Let's push you along.
Yeah, that's great.
And Kent, anything to add about the Hebrew, the easy way? Any
No.
questions you have? Okay, good. I mean, it seems like you're moving along, which is great. Ellen, how is it going?
I have two questions on page 14. How do you pronounce these and how do you pronounce word?
Okay, so word is davar,
Devar?
right?
Yeah.
Now, and then these is Ayla.
What is it?
Ayla.
Ayla is these.
Yeah. And davar is Ayla.
Ayla is these and Devar is word. And Devarim is words.
Yep. And you're already, so you're already figuring out, Ellen, right? And this is an important thing for everyone to understand, right? That as with many, many languages, right, when a word changes form, right, when it becomes plural or when it gets combined with other words, whatever, right, that there's what's called vowel alteration, right? The weird thing about Hebrew is that the vowel alteration is actually marked in the way the word is spelled.
So
Right, with the
devar
vowels.
is word, devar is word.
Devar is word, right? Divarim is words, right? So the first
Ayla is these.
Ayla is these, right? Exactly. Right. So
And-
Hebrew can seem confusing, right? But just remember to to read the word according to the way the vowels are, right? And you'll be okay.
And the word and,
Yeah, so the word and is a funny one, right? Because many words like that, prepositions and particles in that would be separate words in English,
huh?
are just parts of words in Hebrew. Right? So you don't have a separate word and, right? It's the letter vav attached to the
Vav.
word that follows, right?
I see. Va, that's pronounced vav. Okay.
Right. So it's the, right? But in front of certain letters, it's pronounced u. So again, like just, the main thing about Hebrew, right, is that you, on one hand, you want to notice the differences because these are actually rules. It's not
Mhm.
random.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, a person's brain can only handle so many rules at once,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to live in this intermediate place of discomfort where you're like, I know that this is a rule, but I don't understand the rule, right?
Hmm.
And so if you see "oo" in front of a word as opposed to "the," it still means and you will learn the rule eventually.
Okay. Okay.
Yep,
Thank you.
lots of rules.
Yeah, there's a lot of rules. There's too many rules to learn. And I think this is one of the things about learning a language, right? Is that when we learn languages, right, there are a few people who are like me, right, who prefer to learn all the rules, right? I get very upset if I don't know the rules, right? And so I see these alterations and I'm like, there must be a rule for this, but no one will tell me what it is. And I get very upset, right? Because I learn languages through grammar, right? There's not very many people like me, but I'm one of them, right? But most people, I think, learn languages. They learn. It's easier for them to learn grammar after they already know a little bit of the language.
Yeah.
Yeah, I keep asking Sherry, well, why is this or when to use that? And she says, don't pay so much attention to the rules.
Right. So on the other hand, Mayim, you as sort of a professional linguist / translator might be more in my camp than in hers. So if you if you have questions about the grammar, feel free to ask me. I'll do my best to explain.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to take my dog out, but thank
Well,
you.
it's time for us to end, but so thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone.
All right, we'll be in touch. I'll see you next week.
Shabbat shalom.
Hopefully I'll see you tonight or tomorrow too. Okay.
Okay, good job.